primarily we produce shows for public, along with working with school children, and we keep a strong eye on what is happening in the campus theater. For the last 12 years, I had been curating a festival called ACT, stands for Ateliers Campus Theater. There's a repertory company of Atelier which is traveling, which was traveling, I must say, for last 1.5 years. Because of pandemic, we are stalled. We are not traveling, but focusing on reading and discussing more. Yeah, I think more I will discuss as we progress. Thank you, SIMRAT.
Thank you so much for introducing yourself. And Megha, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. My name is Megha Rao. I am a performance poet. I'm a visual artist, podcaster, workshop facilitator. I've been featured on Penguin Random House, Spoken Fest, Thought Catalog, The Hindu, Indian Express, and some other super cool spaces. And yeah, I've got a poetry book coming out this year in December with HarperCollins. So yeah, like KULJEET sir said, we'll discuss more about everything later. Yeah.
Of course, we will. Thank you so much. Niranjani, would you like to go next? Yeah, can you hear us, Niranjani? Dr. Han or Anushka, if anyone's able to hear, I think they can continue.
Sure, I can hear. Firstly, I'm so glad to be a part of this panel. I'm Anushka and I'm a theatre maker based out of Hyderabad. I'm currently a part of the team and a mentor at THESPO. The organization that I'm a part of, that is THESPO, is a youth theatre movement. And by that I mean we try to make theatre as accessible as possible for young people around the world, and we try to facilitate and build a global community of theatre professionals by hosting activities throughout the year, which include play readings, workshops, and we also have a festival that happens usually in December. Yes, that's about me and THESPO. Over to you, SIMRAT.
Yeah, thank you so much. Dr. Han or Niranjani, if they're listening to us and can share something, introduce themselves to the room.
Hello everybody, and SIMRAT. Gaiti, thank you for having me and for organizing this. My name is Hanne. I'm originally from the Netherlands, but I've been living in India for the last 30 years or so. I'm working for a grassroots organization called the KATTAIKUTTU SANGAM. KATTAIKUTTU is the theatre we work with. It's a traditional theatre form performed in Tamil Nadu. We are based near Kanchipuram. And as part of our work, we have been running a residential school for children, rural children and young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Unfortunately, because this was a residential school, it had to close down at the beginning of the pandemic. The kids came from many different villages, and we devoted equal time to teaching them theatre, KATTAIKUTTU, as well as formal education. The school was run by the Sangam, and the Sangam itself is an association of rural performers. They are composing the board. So this is quite an unusual situation where the performers themselves take decisions on which way they want to take their theatre. And KATTAIKUTTU is also a form of theatre a non-elite form of theatre, I would say, as compared to what happens elsewhere in Tamil Nadu with the classical Carnatic music scene and Bharatanatyam scene. We are on the opposite end of this divide that kind of makes the differences between folk and classic in the discussion.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And I'd just like to mention that she's right now in a remote area, so her internet might just create a little bit problem, but I think we can bear with it. And yeah, she's back. Great. We can move on to our last panelist, Niranjani. Yeah. We're not able to hear you, Niranjani. If you're listening to us, then
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Great.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you, Niranjani. You can
Hello?
go forward.
Niranjani, we can hear you.
1659.
Hi, thanks for I'm so sorry, there's something really wrong with my phone and my internet connection. And there's a strange metallic voice that informs me from time to time. Hi, I know KULJEET here, I know of Hanne's work, and I'm afraid the others, I'm looking forward to getting to know them. My name is Niranjani, thanks for having me here. I've run a theatre company for the past 10 years, called Puppet Company, and we work in India and also in France. And I studied in France. I studied at the Sovereign University, Theatre Studies at the Sovereign, and then at the Jacques. I have been living, I think, mostly in Dharamshala now for about 5 years, where I had started a film.
Thank you so much. So I'll just quickly share about myself and my practice as well. And I'm an independent performance artist and drama and educational facilitator. I've been practicing theatre for the past 8 years now. I'm acting, facilitating, and recently also started researching performance predominantly through the realm of theatre itself. And for the past 2 years, I've been actively working in the field of drama and education as a planner and a facilitator. And well, yeah, that's about it. And well, with that, I'd like to just open the discussion further for our panelists with our first question. And just to start with the discussion, I just want to ask, how has the past year been for you as a practitioner, and how has the pandemic changed or modified your practice? And anyone can start it. I'm opening it to all the panelists.
SIMRAT, shall I respond to this?
Yes, of course.
While a lot of my friends started using digital technology to perform, I was always of the opinion that let's not get into this hush-hush mode and do anything just to tell our world that we survive. People know we survive. It's only a matter of maybe, if not couple of months, then couple of years. We'll be back. We'll be back with a bang. And what can we do while we are not performing? I think for me, theatre is not just performing. For me, theatre is also reading. Theatre is also reading plays which we could not get time in the last decade because of our hectic performance schedule. So in last 1.5 years or whatever, 13, 14 months, slightly more than that, personally and with the group, I managed to read almost 30 plus plays, which means You see texts which were written by masters, which were performed for stage, which we had seen sometimes, but we wanted to discuss those shows, those plays, those texts, those performances in greater detail. That is something which we did, and we were happy about it. Though we were sad that we were not able to perform, we were not able to travel with our shows. But then pandemic also allowed us to use the technology in order to interact while being at home. Uh, we did not perform deliberately because most of my actors felt, as Oscar Wilde says, the immediate nature of theatre is something which appealed to us all our lives, and we felt it's okay. Let's wait. Let's enrich ourselves by reading people, reading their works, and I think that's what has kept us busy and engaged throughout the pandemic. In the second wave, things were berserk. A lot of actors, including me, we lost near and dear ones as well, along with falling ill, feeling desperate, and also seeing the worst part of practicing theatre when you see your theatre actors and theatre comrades and theatre workers do not even have bare minimum to survive, which also led us to think, is there a policy, is there a cultural policy in a world like the part where we live called India, which boasts of long great tradition of culture? Is there a policy? If not, then shall we not think about it? I think I'll stop there.
I think really you started with a very unique take on this and how we've been working in the pandemic. I think yes, as sad or as there was a halt between all our practices and actions, but I think there was also a breather to take a break and get back to reading, maybe open up different dimensions of theatre, not just which doesn't always require physical action on stage, just shared with the spectators, but also which can be done individually or with a group of people who just want to sit and read. And all of this, along with in the pandemic, grief and problems of sustenance, it's really important for us to talk about all of this. Any other panelists who want to take this forward?
Thank you so much for already very difficult but important points that the life of the theatre for us as practitioners, it's very difficult to make a switch to digital for many different reasons. One, the form does not lend itself issues we face, that we divide already being there between urban, rural, folk, classical, and what other categories you have seems to be widening now. And then the second most very important point is livelihoods. What happens when we
Yeah, we unfortunately lost her, but I hope she'll be back soon. She also, pointed out few important points that we have, like important things that we have been going through. The artists have been facing the pandemic, which is transforming the practice, which might just be predominantly about liveness and live theater, live art form, to a digital platform, and at the same time sustaining it through that. So yeah, anyone else, or Dr. Hen, if you're here, you can continue.
Yes, sorry,
Yeah.
being thrown out. So, well, these are the two very important points on our side.
Yeah.
The livelihood of the performers and the fact that it's not easy to make the shift, and maybe not desirable at all to make the shift to going digital. So maybe other people can comment on how they handle this, see this, experience this.
Yeah, thank you so much. Anyone else would want to go?
I would like to respond if that's all right.
Yes, of course.
So I'm predominantly an arts manager at THESPO, and I think what we've been trying to do over the last 21 years when things were on ground, was to cater to the needs of the youth around the world, and try and get theatre to be as accessible as possible. So when the pandemic hit, I think there were similar dilemmas that we were facing. Can you really call it theatre if it goes digital? What's the need for anything to go digital? And I think what led to a lot of our work shifting digital last year was the thought that a lot of what drives theatre is the community. We were all locked up, and more than anything, the idea of physical isolation was being perpetuated. I know people were saying it's social distancing, but what was required was physical isolation. And by no means did that mean that social connection couldn't take place, which is what we went in thinking, that it was important for us to foster that sense of warmth and belongingness, even if it was coming through a Zoom room. So normal activities that we would conduct, which included participative play readings, usually we'd host them on ground, where people would come together and we'd read plays together and discuss it with one another. Those naturally we were able to shift a lot easier to Zoom when compared to other activities that we did. So we started having play readings, and people from all across the world started coming in, attending those. Along with that, we started workshops, because again there was a thirst for people to know more and stay interactive. All through all the years that I've been working at THESPO, I've heard different people come in and say different things, and one thing that stuck is someone mentioned to me once that art really consumes you, and you need to let it out at some point, and people had stories to tell. So you had workshops, you had writing workshops, you had collaborations that we ended up doing with people from different countries. Again, I don't think it came up from as much of a survival need as it did to just stay connected and to just have that outlet, without letting the art consume. After a while, it also became about how could we provide a brief, since we are a youth theatre movement, we're not a repertory, we don't have our own hired actors. It also became about what work can we give people, what amount of employability can we provide. If we are doing a collaboration, can we tie up and see if anyone's willing to fund this project, so that people can end up gaining something else out of this as well. So these were just a few things that we did. The question still largely remained about what this new form or hybrid is. Is it theatre? We resorted to calling any performance that we curated online a digital performance. That term is something that we ended up finding fit well. And for us, it became important to preserve the live aspect of a digital performance. Because when you put theatre online, or when you're trying to adapt it online, you're technically also competing with a bunch of different streaming platforms that already exist, like your Netflix or your Amazon Prime. So that in a way was a struggle for us to figure out how to preserve the live aspect of what was on ground known as theatre. And other conversations also included about what does this mean for a digital audience. Audiences on ground usually tend to view theatre, it's a shared experience, right? You're going to any theatre performance that you're watching, you're usually sitting with a bunch of people. They are experiencing emotions, you're experiencing with them. Your chairs are placed in such a way that all of you are probably sitting on the same level. There aren't too many stairs in place. You don't have high armchairs or a reclining chair as you would in the movie. So that's a shared experience for audience as well. Your performers end up playing off of that energy, and that's what also makes theatre theatre. In the digital world, one of the realizations that we had was that it became an alienating experience even for an audience member who would watch, let's say, a performance that we curated at the festival. And a lot of last year was just trying to navigate how we could go around these things, how we could have more performances that were immersive, that could include audience participation, that were more of a live experience than a replication of theatre on ground, just to foster that sense of community. So yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anushka. These are like extremely important and some very innovative ideas that you've put forth, and I think we're all struggling in trying to find the ways how we can transform this art and this whole idea of liveness. It has transformed, it has changed completely from live art to this liveness on the digital platform, and how are we going to compete with different types of online platforms. And yeah, anything that Niranjani or Megha needs to add?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what Anushka said. Even poetry, performance poetry is very personal. So it's very different when it shifts to, let's say, the digital platform. It's different when you're taking it online. And it was like two struggles. Well, one was definitely taking it online. The other struggle was certainly making money, for sure. There were months when it wasn't great, months that were pretty okay. The one thing you realize after a point is that you definitely couldn't depend on stage shows. And I used to do a lot of live poetry performances, and that was sort of a very stable, regular thing for me. But when the pandemic hit, I realized that I had to look for other sources that gave me stability. So yeah, workshops definitely helped, conducting workshops, but also like other things. Like I had to look into other avenues, like maybe starting a paid newsletter or having a podcast of my own. I struggled with maintaining the personal when I was performing live online. So I think after a point, I fell off the whole digital performance scene, or even making videos. I just wasn't comfortable. But audio worked for me. So I think everyone has their own thing, and everyone has their own, let's say, outlet, even in a pandemic. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it diversifies with performance, with the type of performance that you're working with, right? The art form. So with you, I think it really worked. The audio worked, and anything that Niranjani needs to add, and we'll let move forward.
So hi. So since one of the projects that I've started recently, I mean it's been 5 years now, 5-6 years. It's a community theatre project in Himachal, which is not a completely rural area, but it's a peri-urban area. And we have this annual festival, and last year, before the first wave happened, the festival had just concluded, and the first wave hit like 10 days after. And I think initially I was just like stunned and shocked as everyone else. And after the first month was trying to just navigate this completely new thing of functioning, of being shut down inside our houses, not being able to step out, the basic freedom of movement gone. And but when I got around to looking at what was online, as I'd explained to you earlier, to Kathy earlier, this it wasn't a world I felt comfortable in. But for doing theatre. But what we did start with a few other theatre colleagues was a listening space. After hearing really, really horrible stories of young and old actors, theatre people, performers, technicians, who were really struggling with being alone in this lockdown. So that was last year, and we'd also explored the audio. I completely agree with you, Megha, in the audio form. I really found that super interesting, and done this radio play called Butter and Mashed Bananas. I mean, it was not a radio play; it was a regular theatre script, but we made it as a digital kind of online storytelling and play, and it's Butter and Mashed Banana by Ajay Krishnan, and that was about it. Last pandemic, that was all the work I could get done. Like Kuljeet said, a lot of reading, a lot of introspecting also of why theatre? Why do we do theatre? What is the kind of theatre we do? How vital is it? Is it vital? Etc. etc. So that was my experience of the first wave. And we just started having readings again because as part of the Drift program, we do these monthly, bi-monthly regular public readings in cafes and restaurants and spaces that people lend us all around Dharamshala. And we had launched a new series called, where we were going to read plays by contemporary Indian playwrights. And we did the first reading and the pandemic hit. So I have really not much to add about the online world because I'm afraid it's completely, pretty much unknown to me. But I just have to say that, at least for me, theatre remains a very embodied art. And the joy of it for me was the exchange of energy that one felt in a shared space. And when that was taken away, somehow the desire to do theatre was also taken away.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Niranjani. I think for me as well, I think the sense of community that we have when we do theatre, people, the sense of belongingness that in the space that we foster, I think that really builds the meaning of theatre for me as well. But as we're talking about changing, transforming to different platforms, to a digital platform, and the process that we endured, that changed, can you all just share a little bit more about your creation process, how it modified the last year, not just in the matter of fact that we're changing from physical space to a digital space, but also in coherence with, because we were also isolated, alone, dealing with grief, and I think all of these emotions, and as well as modifying our performance, our art form into a different form, into a different platform, how has that changed, and how has that creation process fit into this new normal?
Okay, I'm gonna take this question first. I had trouble finding a routine for sure. I had writer's block many times. No, also because a big part of my life was focused on travel and adventure and meeting new people. So after a point, I'm not having a lot of movement in a day, things started feeling very ordinary, very mundane. And before I knew it, there wasn't much to write about within my four walls. It was the same day over and over again. And also, there's just so much of bad news everywhere, and you hear about people falling sick, people falling sick or passing away, and that's very triggering. So yeah, as an artist, nothing about this was healthy as far as creativity was concerned. So it did get quite difficult to feel inspired. But the one thing I did to navigate my creative block was that I read a lot of books, because books definitely tend to introduce us to new worlds and new characters, and in many ways that felt like I was in a new world, or I was meeting new people again. So that definitely helped. I also slipped back into my routine by giving me a lot of writing prompts, and and definitely the podcast was there, so I had to keep writing and performing one new piece every month, so that kept me going as well. But yeah, there were a lot of days when I would just stare at my laptop or my notebooks, and it was chaotic, but some days the ideas were kind to me. So it's been up and down, but I think I could safely say for the past 1 month it's been okay. It's been okay. Yeah.
Yeah, Megha, of course, I think it's really overwhelming for all of us as artists to, make this shift and understand our performance making journey, because there are a lot of changes continuously happening. And anything else that anyone else wants to add?
Yes, I think it's very difficult to speak about theatre in general in India, because as I tried to kind of explain in rural areas, that shift to the digital world is simply not there, and neither for the performers nor for the audiences. So there are very few ways out in what to do otherwise. What kind of theatre can you make when it cannot be live and when it cannot be commissioned by rural patrons who are willing to pay for these performances? So what I have seen that in spite of the pandemic, some performances have been taking place because the need for theatre is so huge that even in some remote village they would put on a performance or bribe the police in order to have live theatre in spite of the pandemic. And this was driven also by the fact that performers are desperate in not having any money. So in a way this leads to very risky behavior of putting on live performances and saying, oh, in my village that corona nobody has it, in spite of the fact also that they say, because we do perform also on the occasion over there, a specific play from the Mahabharata. Many more of this particular play has been commissioned because of the corona pandemic. So in my experience, it's very hard to talk about any kind of digital platform. It's just the connectivity is not there. I've gotten to Grindongo, sitting in a rural area, be cut off from that world. And in addition, we do 8-hour performances, so that is not something which translates easily into digital format. Also given the fact that all performers with very little education, but with a huge performance experience, do not look at their own art form in a very analytical way, and some kind of analytical approach and taking the form apart is required in order to go digital. We work with a very different kind of knowledge, which is embodied, and where all the media the primary media come together, the spoken word, music, songs, acting, makeup, movement. To take that apart for a digital product is a very difficult kind of thing, I think, for rural performers. And the other thing is, even if we would do that, who would pay to watch that kind of 8-hour performance online? So I think we are really stuck and have to think of hoping that the pandemic will kind of disappear at one moment in time. We have had in between an opportunity to perform in between the first and the second wave with online production involving different performers also to create work, as well as with a workshop, 10 Sundays, a live workshop with a variety of participants, both from 10A and rural aged from 12 till 58. So these are the two things we've been able to do, and then the next lockdown came upon us. and work for people who do not have that access. And this is the problem of the pandemic. I think that it enlarges the divides which are there already.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this really makes us move forward to this whole idea of this issue of inclusivity and exclusivity of not just theatre but art performances, art spaces, and moving towards a digital platform, towards a digital art space. I think it really cuts out a major section in our socioeconomic situation. I think really, and before moving on to that, to this topic, I think everyone else can share a little bit more about their, the changes in their performance making journey, and then we can really move on to how exclusive and inclusive these art spaces have been.
Yeah, so just to talk about the changes that have been brought up within the existing rhythm of what we used to do. A majority of what we had initially been curating, I think now we had to rethink a lot about what was required and needed, and we often found that, like Megha spoke about earlier, there were individuals who were always also struggling with creating. They experienced a block. A lot of them were lonely. A lot of people were touch-starved. A lot of people were operating far away from very remote places. And we realized that usually every play reading that we would host, people would want to just stay back after the reading, not say anything. There was a sense of trying to spend as much time with strangers that you didn't know an hour before the reading began. So I think what ended up happening was, based on how I would curate workshops or how I would go about curating community events, was to try and see what people wanted to talk about. We ended up creating something called Chai at Tapri, where people would just log in and have a discussion about what they were feeling about the theatre, have any conversations or concerns that they had in general. So it became a sharing space, and if anyone had any stories or anecdotes that they wanted to share, it became a place for that as well. With respect to our workshops, again, the idea was to see what individuals were interested in learning about, what is it that they wanted to do. There was a lot of interest in writing, since that was something that people found that they could do a lot more easily when they didn't have access to one another. So there were a few longer writing workshops that came into place. Slowly, what we also try to do is we try to approach folk artists, and we try to set up workshops that they end up taking. So we'd have a Kalari Payattu workshop sometimes. We've done a Midisi workshop at one place. Just again, this was for employability and exposure purposes as well. So those were things that we were starting to take into account, and to try and see the feasibility, the time that individuals from across the world could access this. A large part of what we were also doing is there were people who, we had put up a festival in December, and we usually accept registrations for performances that people might want to showcase. Now, with the pandemic and the lockdown, there were a lot of people who didn't have equipment that would be able to capture something live, or they didn't know how to go about creating something. So the first and foremost, our idea was if there was someone who wanted to create and didn't have the resources to at the moment, is to somehow fetch whatever resources that we could to be able to send it to them. Secondly, it wasn't compulsory that performances happened on Zoom or, let's say, a streaming platform. There were people who had come up with ideas of creating a live show on WhatsApp. Then the audio medium really took off, as both Megha and I think Niranjani mentioned. We started trying to put an initiative together to cultivate audio fiction. And finally, with respect to some of the collaborations that we ended up creating with people from Canada, we also started exploring performances that could happen on the phone. So minimal equipment, things that still made people feel personal and connected. So we had a performance that happened over a phone call where 6 actors across the span of 6 days would contact one audience member for 15 minutes each day. And they each day a little bit of a narrative would be revealed, and the audience member would actively be a part of this narrative. These were just some of a few ways that we tried to still facilitate that feeling of belonging and togetherness. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Anushka, for sharing that. There are a lot of ideas that came to my mind after this, and one question I want to ask you: that what has been? I mean, this is really nice that how you changed and found different ways of engaging through digital medium. And was it only the factor that you have to change this performances accordingly in this medium, or how has your creation process changed? Like what difference was it before, and how different did you feel in the performance making process? Not just of course.
Yeah. So again, having been primarily on the curation side of it, or the production side of all of this, like I said, it really just boiled down to the type of workshops and performances and festivals that we were curating. Earlier, when we'd have workshops in Bombay, we'd have a particular venue set. There were particular, our workshops were charged. When we shifted to the online medium, again, it became a question of attempting to be as inclusive as possible. So trying to look at workshops that people required and wanted, and also since our workshops went online, it wasn't just merely about shifting it online. It always boiled down to the need of the hour or what people required at that very moment. So it had to take in it shifted to a pay as you can basis in the beginning, where we'd also start sharing proceeds from the workshops to any of the charities, theatre or performance related charities that were trying to put funds together. Eventually the workshop facilitators, also it was about also giving them some employability at that point. It became about creating spaces where people felt safe enough to share their stories, because we realized that's what was important at the moment, right? We weren't necessarily looking at incredible live replication of theatre. It became more about, you want to express yourself, then we want to be able to create a safe space for you to access. Curating all of that was involved a lot of conversations with young people who at that time had approached us and asked us about the different ways that they could still express themselves or talk about their stories or share their journey or grow even when everything else had been shut down. There were a lot of young people again, who had college plans, all of that got cancelled. There was just so much loneliness going on. It was just about creating a stronger community. About curating our festival itself, I think, as I mentioned earlier, the emphasis was on using the digital medium innovatively, and that could have been any form of digital media. Keeping in mind again what people had access to, how we could provide access, how we could make it a more inclusive space. So if you're talking about what was different from when it was on ground, well, when it was on ground, even at our festival, while we still had participation from different parts of the city, what the digital medium did was, even at the festival, there was no guarantee that everyone would have the same variables, right? Some people might not have access to the same equipment, some people might not have a strong internet connection, and then therefore it became, if we are talking about enabling young performers and young creators, then it became about how can we give that extra aid to make that happen.
Yes. Kuljeet sir, do you want to add something to this?
Well, I think what Niranjani and Dr. Hanna said about community is something which uh, should be looked at more profoundly. I think what saved us is this community and that sense of belonging when it comes to community. which unfortunately is lacking more specifically in urban Indian theatre traditions. The moment you shift yourself into rural, you see, theatre performance traditions, we see that there is some sort of support system which is there, well in place. I mean, when I visited Hegdu in Karnataka, I realized that looking at their model of working with regard to traveling with the shows, uh, we all know that doing theater in a place like Delhi, booking an auditorium, bringing audiences, selling tickets, and managing your funds is a Herculean task. And with the kind of I mean, meager support, or shall I say, no support from the government, in the absence of the cultural policy. Uh, I mean, it's only the passion of the artist which is at work 24/7, and hence theater is surviving, with the exception of some major government funded repertory companies. Um, so I think what Niranjani is doing, and what Dr. Hannah mentioned, I think the sense of community is something which I would like to perhaps look at, and that's what I had been trying to do, creating a kind of urban community. Most of my performances do not happen in the hub of theatre scene in Delhi, as they call it, Mandi House, or areas which are more popular. I had been doing theatre shows in schools, in colleges, in spaces which are not very popular, so to say, and conventional in nature. And I think most of the times the audience who would come to watch those shows are first timers as well. So we are also attempting to create newer audiences. And I think that's how community is going to build over a period of time. Mm, yeah, I mean, Simrat, I think this sense of community and creating community, and understanding what community means for artists, and to be very specific for theater walas, is something I would like to unravel for myself. And I think my panelists would also agree with me that this is going to take us somewhere. We have witnessed it in the second wave of the pandemic. Governments failed. Communities, they came together. They risen, and they did something amazing. The kind of support system which these communities made during the second wave was amazing. And I think I bow my head to these communities, whether it's about providing oxygen, or providing medicines, or providing food to people who are around you, is is amazing and very heartwarming. And I think that kind of sense we need to have when it comes to create a performance, because the performance cannot be created in isolation. It has to be done. Uh, it has to be done keeping the ethos in mind, keeping the sensibilities in mind. What Dr. Hannah was talking about uh, with regard to the rural Indian audiences, they do not look at those performances with a lens of analysis. They are so in love with the tradition and the performances that they go there because there is a kind of strong connection and bonding to those performances. I think these are very heartwarming comments and concerns, and I'm really thankful to Niranjani and Dr. Hanna to share those details with us. And I think in rural India, we can definitely look at these models, and we should, because while we are talking about, universalization in terms of reaching out and technology, still this idea of close knit community is what is going to take theater somewhere, is my strong feeling. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I think this is very, very important. And when we talk about these inclusive and exclusive spaces, art spaces, and I think even in art education, it really matters, because for the past 1.5 years, when I was working with an NGO, and we were appointed these government schools where we used to go facilitate drama and education sessions. And with the pandemic, we had to change our whole process into the digital form, and 90% of my students did not they didn't have access to mobile phones or internet. And us negotiating how we're going to involve art education and a sense of community with them, and try to still continue our process with them, was a big challenge. And this needs to be, I think, talked about in urban spaces furthermore. And talking about this, I think, have you faced challenges in experiencing, as well as ensuring, when we talk about shared spaces and equality in these shared spaces, do you face challenges in experiencing as well as ensuring equality in these spaces that you work in, be it social or be it economic, while not just while performing or sharing your performance with the audiences, but across art forms?
Is that question for me, SIMRAT?
Yeah, it's open to all actually. Yeah.
Okay. If you can repeat it, maybe simplify it further. I think I missed the sense of it. Yeah.
I think, were there any specific maybe challenges that you experienced? Because I think this is one thing that you're also facing, right? This whole idea of how in rural spaces that theater is persisting, the performance is persisting, and this whole idea of performance also changes from space to space, right? So while you practiced in your personal practice, did you face challenges in these spaces, ensuring equality in these, like social or economics, making your practice accessible to these people, to such spaces?
Yeah, I mean, in a community-led initiative, I think the sense of equality is much more in comparison with a performance which has been sponsored or ticketed. Because then there are other ways of getting your space to watch a show. You know what I mean? When we look at community-led performances, it involves, and the purpose of making that performance has a different politics per se, as against making a show for, let's say, a big event, or let's say a show which is made for a corporate organization, or let's say a show which is commissioned by the government. So the politics would vary from one space of creation to the other. And when we know that the community and the space we work with, it has its own ecosystem, and obviously there are values to those ecosystem which you create. And I think equality comes natural to that particular space because of the purpose and politics of doing it. On the contrary, when the purpose is different, and it's the process of production and consumption is different. This a sense of equality, the sense of equality in a performance would have a different dimension completely. Yeah, that's what I feel. Yeah, maybe others can add.
If I may react on that is very true. I think that the purpose of performance is probably very different in an urban auditorium or a rural space. And in my experience, the performances we do, they are commissioned by rural people and paid for. So it is their performance. And that is also a bit difficult to talk about creativity because the performers, and this is a kind of double whammy, there is community support, traditional performances also in India, they come from within the caste system. So performers cannot afford to antagonize patrons against them, and therefore these performances are really flexible and they accommodate whatever demands are made on them. On the other hand, the community also now feels the responsibility to, for instance, feed performers. Several villages have been donating rice to performers who are without work. So these are kind of relationships over time. We're not talking here about a commodified product where you go and buy a ticket. We have no ticket sales. We receive a lump sum which is paid for by the village. So it is almost impossible, I think, to compare that kind of performances and the purpose of the performance, which is not only entertainment, but they are embedded within the kind of the ritual or religious structure of rural areas, and also very much so within the agrarian season. You can't compare that kind of performance with the kind of performance in Delhi or Chennai or a festival performance where the context is so different and where the relationship over time between performances and audiences is non-existent, or it is much more an individualized experience. The same for creating performances as an individualized kind of effort is something which goes against the kind of community ideal where, of course, performers have own creativity, but they never put it up front as this is what I need. You're part of an ensemble. We perform as a group of 15. So the kind of wide range of kind of performances and purpose of performances we have in the pandemic is so diverse and it's very hard to generalize. And I can speak only from my own experiences how this works. I know coming from the Netherlands that we don't have that kind of performances at all. We lost it. I mean, there it's something you go to a performance after work. It is like in education in India, it's extracurricular. But actually, performance should be part of the curriculum. It should not be an extracurricular activity. But the education bureaucracy finds it impossible to accept because performance is not on the same line as doing your math subject or Tamil or social science or science. So maybe you want to react on it.
Yeah, I think Megha, would you like to add something?
I found that very insightful actually, like that, in rural areas it's so different than like inclusivity and the idea of inclusivity, because in urban, like Dr. Han said, it's different in a Chennai or a Delhi or a Bombay. And because I'm part of the let's say Bombay poetry circle, I think I would be able to elaborate more on how we've not been as inclusive as we've liked to be, and that's one thing that I've personally found really upsetting, even though it's something that I bring up quite a few times. As an ally, I know I can be quite ignorant still about many things because of my privilege, but I make an effort every day to unlearn old habits and to educate myself. So when I host events, which I don't usually do because ultimately I'm a poet, not a company or business that hosts poetry events, but sometimes I do. And the last time we did it to raise funds for the trans community in Ahmedabad and Gandhinagar. Every time I curate a lineup, an artist lineup, I always make sure that it's inclusive. This year particularly, it's been a point with me because I would see all these posters from art circles online with the same faces again and again. Poets performing poems about marginalized communities but never passing the mic, and that was truly disheartening. And the problem is that it's convenient for a lot of people who have already taken up space to be vocal about issues but never truly make an effort to share that space that they have with those who are at the crux of that issue. I've seen that happening so many times where someone performs a poem about a social issue just because it's relevant without really passing the mic and staying in their lane and giving the person who's actually going through that issue an opportunity to talk about that issue. There's a lot of hashtag white savior mentality happening here, and seeing that is very exhausting. And it's not just in let's say the performance poetry circle, it happens even with publishing. I guess you see a lot of queer literature and or Dalit literature that's written by upper caste heterosexual men, and that's super weird. So I guess it's gonna take time. We need to constantly, make a significant effort to be good allies and not just performative social media allies. I think that's just very important.
Yeah, I think it's really like Dr. Hanna said, that the context of performance is extremely diverse, and we cannot possibly compare two spaces together and put hierarchy or maybe just generalize the idea of performance that is there. And how Megha shared about inclusivity in poetic circles in the poetry circle in Bombay, I think it's really important for us to look at the fact that where does the agency of imparting that action of sharing your performance lies. Who is sharing, where that person is sharing, how they're sharing. And we need to continuously keep talking about where the agency really lies and who can really speak for and speak with through their performance, through their art form. And Anushka or Niranjani ji, if you want to add something else to this.
I barely heard what Hannah was saying because of my net connection. But I think if there's something that this pandemic has really made very clear, it is the lack of access of millions of people in our country to most things. And theatre being way low on the list. But and since we do our work in Dharamshala, which is there are lots of villages which are hard to access, etc., etc. One of the things that we have been working on is trying to make performances in the local languages, not just Hindi and English, but also Gaddi and Tibetan. Gaddi is a local nomadic tribe, and they're a large population of the Dharamshala region, and Pahari, and telling stories that they want to hear, and also through workshops that we organized before the pandemic hit, writing workshops of them telling their own stories, not someone else telling their stories, as Megha said, of passing the mic or just making space if possible. And if one of the things the pandemic has done, the first wave and the second wave, is completely closing down this door, because you just cannot step out. Most of these places don't have internet access. If they have internet access, it's for a very, very few people. Some of the kids in these villages, they couldn't even access school because they didn't have phones, and if they had phones, they were not working. The internet was bad. So when it's access, it's very basic. The moment we say, oh, we're passing online, then we're completely cutting out a large number of people. Large. And since my field of interest is really about how do I get theatre to a lot of people who otherwise do not have access to it, I think the only thing we could manage was between waves. And the first wave and the second wave was just spent mostly one trying to understand what was happening in our country. As Kuljeet very rightly said, I mean, there was a complete breakdown of governmental infrastructure. And it was only people and communities who came together to build this, to help people. But I think there's also something which, as theatre people, I would like to keep reminding myself when I'm like, oh, but there's no, I'm not creating. There's no urgency to create. And I think when I do create, I would like to bear witness to what is happening. And I can only do that when I've completely understood what is happening to us, not just our country, but also the world we live in, which is completely and irrevocably changed.
Thank you, Niranjani. Anushka, you want to add something to this?
Yeah. So firstly, it's been very insightful to listen to everyone else, and given that most of my interactions happen again with only a certain age group of people, it's quite lovely to hear about the work that has been happening, or just the different thoughts that have come out in the panel. Since this question was about equality, this has been something that we've been struggling with and I'd like to echo something that Megha said about not having it as inclusive of a space as you would like. And yes, I do. It is about. I'd reiterate everything everyone said about internet access along with different equipment, but something that we've also come across is with making it an inclusive space for individuals with particular disabilities as well, because performing online again comes with a host of different challenges all over again. Again, the need for why at all we did try to approach the online medium was to remain connected, was to still create something together because of the need for connection. And this is something that we're still struggling with in terms of making it a more inclusive space and trying to figure out how it is possible to reach out and how it's possible for more and more people to stay together. Again, I don't think we've reached an ideal solution to it at all. But what we do want to do, or what I at least hope to achieve, is to have a conversation or at least an open dialogue to try and figure things out. Again, this I do mention, and I mean for THESPO as well as in terms of an organization, how that can come forth and try to just bridge any form of need to remain connected.
Yeah, thank you, Anushka. And I'll just not. I'll just try to move the conversation further by asking that where do you think that the future is of performance, and where do you think this is moving? We can just use this question to sort of move towards concluding the discussion. Of course, there are a lot of questions, there are a lot of things that came up, and which is very overwhelming, and actually good that we need to keep on having a dialogue about all of these things. And you as artists, you as practitioners, I think really just share about where do you think we as practitioners are moving towards in such times from here. Do you have plans? Are we going to is it when we talk about embodied theatre, when we talk about embodied performance, are we really looking forward to again just going back to performing in live spaces? What do you think is the future of these art forms, the future of theatre? And of course they will keep on persisting, and it will because if there's community, there will be performance, there will be art. But anything that you want to share about the idea of future, how we're going to take our performances, take our art forms forward in such times?
I think, yeah, I'm gonna take that question. And also, I believe that at some point between the first wave and the second wave, when like before the second wave, for sure, things were kind of starting to open up. We know that offices opened up in between, and I know for a fact that there were poetry events happening with a limited number of people in the audience, and making sure everyone wore a mask, so I think even during such a stressful time like that, in the middle of a pandemic, if we could achieve that half normalcy, I believe that at some point, theater or performance poetry, performance spaces will start up again. I'm pretty hopeful about that, actually. I don't know how soon, but I feel like it's definite that things will open up. And also, like you said, art and performance and theater, poetry, everything has been around since ages. So I don't think that's a point of worry at all. Like, pandemics have come and gone. We've had plagues, we've had wars, we've had so much of, let's say, trauma through generations, and yet art persists. So I believe that at some point, good things will happen, things will open up again. And I don't know if I don't think it'll be like a sudden normal, but we will slowly move back into that. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Megha. Other panelists can just one by one just share their ideas.
So I would like to say that one, I think we should be using this time to look at how we can make theatre more accessible to a larger number of people.
Yeah.
Whether it's through audio storytelling or teaming up with local community radios to do stories, because finally it is about stories, right? It's about our stories, about their stories, it's about everybody's stories. But I have, like, for example, when we did open up at Drift between the waves, and we really sent out, we had these public readings where we reduced the number of spectators, only 20, masked throughout, super strict, etc., etc. People did come, because I do feel that we have, as human beings, an urge to and a need to come together. And I think what we should privilege is perhaps looking at ways of taking performances outdoors, getting permissions from the government and from municipal bodies to do it in outdoor spaces, so that the audiences and the actors and the everyone involved in this experience feel more reassured. Do as much as possible to reassure both audiences and practitioners that they're not left alone by the wayside, which is what, as KULJEET was saying, we have no policies in place. We have zero cultural policies in place. So if that's something we could work towards, at least I would like to see that happen more than anything else.
Thank you. And I just want to add that if anyone wants to, while talking about this, sharing your thoughts about this, if there are any possible means of support, potential cultural policies, or any grants that you think are beneficial for young art practitioners, I think you can also add that while you speak. I think it will be really helpful for the people, listening to the conversation, and if any young practitioners.
Yeah, I would say look at India Foundation for the Arts. They really have very, very interesting grants for arts practitioners, and they cover a wide variety. I mean, it's quite, I think it's quite useful for a lot of people who can apply for this program. So that's definitely one place you can apply.
I have applied to Indian Foundation for the Arts. They have a lot of applications in, so one of the things we started because of the pandemic is working with young women performers. KATTAIKUTTU has always been exclusively male bastion. So I managed to kind of source dongles, and they have smartphones. So we had some Zoom conversations, and right now some live conversations. I would also suggest a very positive that theatre will return, because I don't think we can live without it. We're human beings. We need to have that kind of sensorial experience. And in between the two waves, we were able to run one workshop which had 5 young kids participating. At that time, I happened to have adopted 2 puppies, and one of the amazing things that happened during the workshop was that while participating, they were also playing around with the puppies. And then I realized that they've been missing touching other people, touching other human beings because of the pandemic. So we're really the great highlight of an artistic workshop to have puppies, Vanessa and Hanne, in the workshop. I'm pretty convinced that theatre will return, and when you look at history, during the plague theatres were closed, but during the influenza pandemic in the 1914-15, theatres have remained open. So we have been reacting to these pandemics also in very different ways. I think we will find a flexible way of acting on the different waves and trying to do the work we really love to do. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just request other panelists to share their thoughts.
So I do again think that theatre will return. I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. Based on just my interaction with young creators that I've met over the last year, the youth has very adapted quite quickly into creating live performances as well, and there's been a lot of innovation that people have done. I've seen puppetry performances online which incorporated which played around a lot with the camera, which moved away to showing puppets interacting with human beings again online. So I have seen a lot of young people do a lot of wonderful stuff with the medium. So that leads me to believe, or at least we discuss the possibilities of hybrid versions existing. Again, I don't mean this for theatre as a blanket thing that's going to happen, but I do think there is a possibility of mediums colliding. Above all of that, just the hope that some of what I've come across last year that has given me, there have been teams that we've met who've very willingly gone ahead and supported other teams mid-pandemic with equipment, with shows, with performances, of the conversations I've had in our community play readings, of the way audiences that have come for any of our open events or performances, and how they have aided a technical glitch or have aided performances who were performing at the same time. I'm hopeful for the future of what's yet to come, and of the community that we've also built during the year. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Anushka. Rita, do you have something to add?
Well, this reminds me of one of the questions which were posed to eminent Indian playwright Girish Karnad Sahab couple of decades back, and somebody asked him, "Theatre is dying. Theatre is dying. What do you think about it?" His response was amazing. He said, for the last 50 years, I had been hearing this. Theatre is dying, it's dying. It's not dead yet. When is it going to die? I think, you see, that theatre is the most basic need of ours. And it had seen adversaries. It had managed to cross all barriers in the past, and I'm sure this is one small little thing, and I'm very optimistic that we'll be back on stage very soon. Um Pandemic has pushed us, specifically a lot of theatre walas, to use technology. More so, you see, performing on Zoom and various different applications which are available. And I think these technologies and these collaborations would only enhance the live performances now. I think, as Anushka also pointed out, the hybridity of any theater performance in the past, and I really see that that's going to happen. And I also see that you see, theater walas would be using these technologies to reach out to the larger cross section of people, not just sitting in the auditorium, but also reaching out to people who cannot commute from their homes to auditorium, but would like to see while there is this live audience in the auditorium as well. So that's what I see. It's happening, and there is a random thought for the last 14-15 months, which is going on in my head, uh, wherein I look at the idea of culture and agriculture together. So a lot of people who had been talking about uh, you see, traditional ways of doing theater. If you look at it, I mean, if you look at the Habib Tanveer's idea of theater, it's actually combining farming with performances. What Dr. Hanna talked about is also from the same region, wherein people are traveling during after completing their farming work. In Karnataka, Hegdu, Ninasam, the same model is also seen. And I think this entire idea of juxtaposing culture and agriculture together is a very exciting idea, and it is taking my fancy for the last couple of years. Because of pandemic, it has only become stronger. So I hope, and I'm very optimistic, things would become better from here. Thank you.
I've been spending my time. We started an organic farm during the lockdown. So now for the last 2 years, some of the
Wow.
performers are working on the farm. So I think agriculture and traditional performing arts share a similar kind of composite knowledge. So that is very important. These kind of knowledges contain very important skills which kids need for their future lives. I mean, school education is totally insufficient. So the skills we teach in the theater and the skills we learn from nature are very important life skills also if you want to build a professional career. So we can think beyond theater as to what do we learn from the theater. Sorry, my connectivity is falling away. I think in addition to making theater as an aesthetic product, there are many other outcomes of theatrical performances.
Right.
Right. Thank you so much. I think this is really interesting, and I think I've also been so fascinated by this idea of performance being a quotidian, surviving in its daily. And since few years I've been thinking about that, and it's really nice to actually listen to these insightful things that you all have to share. Thank you so much. And on this note, because talking about performance in daily, about the culture and agriculture together, I think it's there's this I'd like to share about this program which is actually working with the intersection of self and performance, and it's called Bhitar Bahar. It's an online training program for performing artists to learn how to use their performance in order to process current personal realities. It's like a 4-month part-time online course, and one of the things that is really attractive about it is that the whole team has worked towards making this program really accessible. So it's there's no tuition fee, it's free of cost, and the faculty consist of performance artists, mental health practitioners, and expressive arts therapy people. So if any young practitioner really need to work on their performance and they're interested in in the intersectionality of mental health and performance, I think they should really apply and look up about this project. It's called Bhitar Bahar. And other than that, thank you so much to all the panelists for sharing their thoughts. And this conversation also will be uploaded as a podcast in the coming weeks.